Picture a city carved from pristine white marble. For centuries, the people of Athens firmly believed they had reached the absolute zenith of human wisdom. It was a place where eloquent words could literally bend destiny and where their system of democracy was considered this invincible, impenetrable shield. But how does a civilization at the absolute peak of its intellectual power just completely dismantle itself from the inside out? Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to dive into that exact, chilling paradox. Because when that shield finally shattered, the real story wasn't about the weapons that broke it, but the hands that willingly dropped it. Now, if I asked you how Athens fell, you'd probably say Sparta, right? We always assume military might destroyed their indestructible shield of democracy in 404 BC. We picture invading armies tearing down the city. But the truth we're uncovering from the source material today, it is way more unsettling. The harsh reality of history shows us that Athens had actually begun disarming itself decades before a single Spartan boot marched through their gates. The collapse didn't come from an enemy on the horizon. It was born much closer to home, right in the heart of their bustling assemblies and celebrated forums. Let's look at a prime example, the Salvation Paradox of 406 BC, during the Battle of Arginiasae. Athens had just secured its greatest naval victory of the entire war. They completely crushed the Spartan fleet. It absolutely should have been their ultimate moment of power. But here's the massive contradiction. A huge storm rolled in right after the battle, preventing the victorious generals from rescuing thousands of their own drowning sailors. Now, in a healthy society, you mourn the dead, but you celebrate the survival of the state, right? Not in Athens. Instead of preparing a triumph, the crowd back home actually prepared a gallows for the very minds that had just saved them. So how does a democracy rooted in law suddenly betray itself? Enter the demagogues. The source material reveals the city's downfall was orchestrated by opportunistic leaders who traded foundational truths for the sweet poison of public applause. They didn't see the tragedy of the drowned sailors as a loss. They saw it as an opportunity. They weaponized the mourning clothes of the victims' families, whipping the assembly into this absolute frenzy. Their argument was a twisted paradox. If democracy is supreme, why shouldn't the people be able to stand above the law? They bypassed constitutional procedures entirely, prioritizing immediate bloodthirsty applause over the long-term survival of their own military leadership. And this moral rot didn't just stay in the political arena. It quickly spiraled into a total economic nightmare. Athens didn't just run out of money. They systematically destroyed the physical value of their own empire just to keep up appearances. To maintain this illusion of limitless luxury, they borrowed heavily against a future that was rapidly disappearing. When the treasury dried up, what did they do? They started debasing their famous silver drachma coins, quietly mixing in cheaper metals. And when that still wasn't enough, they resorted to extorting their allies with impossibly brutal taxes. The foundation was rotting away, replaced by pure, unsustainable ambition. This quote right here from our source material absolutely nails it. A system of symbols divorced from material reality. Think about what that actually means. Athens was trying to sustain a massive maritime empire on inflated, hyper-exaggerated beliefs rather than actual tangible strength. It's like they were throwing this lavish party of symbols, talking endlessly about freedom, justice, and naval supremacy, while completely ignoring the fact that they were out of silver, out of allies, and out of sensible leaders. It was an economy and a society built entirely on a mirage. So when we fast forward to 404 BC and the physical defensive walls of the city are finally dismantled, we have to realize it wasn't just rocks falling. It was the devastating collapse of their entire psychological safety net. For generations, those walls were literal proof of their invincibility, their exceptionalism. Stripped of them, the grand illusion just evaporated. Instantly. Suddenly, the citizens were totally exposed, and not just to their enemies, but to the terrifying realization that everything they had believed about their own superiority was a complete lie. And we can actually trace this collapse through a terrifying timeline, where celebrated civic unity dissolved into deep, dark paranoia. We even have the physical evidence of this rushed, panic-driven mindset. Remember that frantic trial of the generals we just talked about? Well, archaeologists excavating the ancient square found voting tokens from that exact event. But they weren't carefully crafted pieces. They were dark, jagged shards hastily smashed from everyday dinner plates. Just picture that. Someone so caught in the collective madness, they just smashed their own dinner plate to condemn a man. That panic trickled right down the timeline. Weeks later, bread prices soar. Months later, that neighbor you used to debate philosophy with, now there's someone who might literally sell you out to Sparta just for a meal. It brings us to this incredibly stark realization: the wisdom of sages cannot buy a loaf of bread for a starving child. All that sophisticated rhetoric, all the profound wisdom of the elite, it meant absolutely zero when ordinary citizens were left totally isolated and hungry. Imagine middle-class families who once proudly debated civic duty, now standing in dead silence in bread lines. The grand theories of their great democracy literally turned to dust when faced with the agonizing reality of empty stomachs. The true collapse of the civilization wasn't losing a war, it was this exact moment, the complete severing of trust and community among everyday people. We are looking at a classic historical loop here, a society completely mesmerized by its own complex institutions and rhetoric, entirely abandoning grounded moral simplicity. Going back to that illegal mass trial of the generals, amidst a sea of 10,000 screaming, bloodthirsty citizens, there was exactly one lonely dissenter standing against the wind, the philosopher Socrates. He happened to be the rotating chairman that day, and he simply refused to put the illegal motion to a vote. He stood entirely alone, leaning on his wooden staff, prioritizing the simple, unbending truth of the law over the weaponized anger of the mob. To make this whole dynamic easier to grasp, the source material uses this really powerful analogy of a massive ancient tree. On the outside, it looks incredibly lush and green, completely hiding the dead, rotted roots underground. That was the great illusion of Athens. When you looked at the city, you saw the flourishing leaves, right? The beautiful Parthenon, the bustling markets, the brilliant philosophers. But deep beneath the soil, their economy, their legal integrity, and their basic morality had just completely decayed. They were essentially feeding on nothingness. And this step-by-step breakdown shows exactly why the end felt so sudden to them. Step 1, the roots silently rot. Step 2, the leaves maintain this lush, beautiful illusion. Step 3, a gentle wind blows. And step 4, total, catastrophic collapse. They spent decades slowly eroding their own foundations through corruption and arrogance, perfectly masking the rot. So by the time that final pressure was applied, that gentle wind, the structure simply couldn't hold its own weight anymore. The collapse wasn't a sudden event at all. It was just the inevitable final step of a long, invisible process. Now you might be wondering, what does this all mean for us today? Well, this isn't just ancient history, it's a direct mirror. It forces us to ask if expanding data metrics are hiding the fractures beneath our own feet. We live in an era where we are absolutely obsessed with data, metrics, and digital illusions of success. We measure our societal wealth in abstract numbers and our connections in digital engagement. But looking back at the fate of Athens, we really have to ask ourselves, are our flourishing metrics just the green leaves of a tree that is secretly rotting at the roots? As this explainer winds down, I want to draw your attention to this quote. Empires rarely fall because they weaken. Mostly, they fall because they have stopped looking directly at the truth. That right there perfectly captures the ultimate tragic irony of Athens. It was a society that prized intellect above all else, yet willfully blinded itself. History isn't just a list of who conquered who. It's a profound lesson about those who lose themselves long before the enemy even shows up. Monuments will crumble, currencies will lose their value, but the agonizing human cost of a society refusing to look at the truth, that's a cycle that echoes across millennia. So I want to leave you with this one provocative thought. Do we have the humility to admit our own limits? Are we humble enough to see the reality behind our own societal illusions before our walls come down? Athens genuinely believed it was the undisputed center of the universe, and that arrogance was its actual downfall. As we navigate our own incredibly complex modern world, maybe the most vital lesson we can take from those ancient fallen stones is the immense power of humility. Thanks so much for diving into this explainer with me today, and keep questioning the walls around you.